The sleek, colossal hull of the Starling Vortex hovered like a dark sentinel over the sprawling Aridin Station. A place where the air hummed with the strange energies of countless species, the massive metal spires reaching out like skeletal hands, catching the light of distant stars and casting long shadows across the station's endless walkways. The constant buzz of voices, mechanical whirring, and the quiet hum of alien technology filled the space, all working in perfect synchrony. Yet, beneath the noise, there was an unmistakable tension in the air, a quiet undercurrent of something far more dangerous than the eye could see. Commander Gage Callahan stepped off the transport ramp, his boots clanking against the cold, metallic floor. His eyes swept over the vibrant, chaotic scene before him, humans, aliens, machines all coexisting, yet always on the edge of conflict. Aridin Station wasn't just a place for trade of goods, but also for power, alliances, and secrets. Before he could adjust to the disorienting chaos around him, Officer Plex approached a gaunt figure, his sharp features and eyes glinting with suspicion. His uniform, a stark contrast of grays and blacks, blended with the shadows like a ghost. "Commander," Plex spoke low, his voice barely audible against the hum of the station. "Watch yourself here. Aridin's not what it seems. Tensions between species have escalated. And there are those," his eyes flicked subtly to the left, "who are problematic." Before Gage could respond, a sudden commotion sliced through the air. A shout. The sharp clash of metal. Tension crackled like electricity. Instinctively, Gage reached for the pulse gun holstered at his side, but his eyes locked on the scene unfolding before him. A fiery clash of color and rage. Viara Tavari, a red-skinned Pyan warrior, stood face to face with Voss, an alien whose skin shimmered in deep blue hues. Their eyes locked, fierce and full of animosity, as they stood amidst a crowd of onlookers, all breathlessly waiting for what would come next. Trell's voice was a growl, his hands balled into fists. "You're a disgrace to your people." Viara's lips curled into a snarl, revealing sharp teeth. "I'd rather die than dishonor my blood," she hissed, each word dripping with venom. Gage's presence cut through the tension like a blade, but Viara's gaze shifted toward him, cold, regal, full of disdain. She was a warrior, proud and untouchable. Before Gage could speak, Viara's head snapped to the side, her eyes blazing with an intensity that felt like the heat of 1,000 suns. "I don't need saving, human," she snarled, her voice thick with contempt. With a swift, fluid motion, she turned on her heel and stormed off, leaving nothing but the echoes of her fierce energy behind. Even as she disappeared into the crowd, something stirred deep within Gage's sense of intrigue, a pull he couldn't explain. There was something about her. Something untamed. Something dangerous. And though she had brushed him off, Gage couldn't shake the feeling that their paths would cross again. The sterile, cold walls of the training chamber reverberated with the sound of boots striking the floor, deliberate, rhythmic. Gage stood in the center of the room, fists clenched, his gaze sweeping the space, already preparing for the challenge ahead. As head combat trainer, he was accustomed to taking charge, molding soldiers on dozens of worlds. But this was different. Nothing had prepared him for this. Not for her. The heavy doors hissed open, cutting through the silence like a blade. The air seemed to shift with her entrance. She stormed into the room all fire and fury, every step exuding confidence. Her red skin gleamed beneath the harsh, artificial lighting. Viara Tavari. She didn't just enter the space, she commanded it. The other trainees instinctively took a step back, eyes wide, aware of the storm that had just entered their midst. She was a force of nature. A Pyan warrior like no other. Today, she wasn't a student. She was a challenge. Her gaze locked with Gage's, and in that moment, an unspoken challenge passed between them. "I dare you." Without a word, she shed her jacket, revealing the smooth, taut muscles beneath. Her back was covered in battle scars, intricate patterns etched by countless fights, each one a story of survival and strength. Her eyes never left his as she slipped into her fighting stance, poised and ready, her body a coiled spring, each muscle tight, a predator waiting to strike. The air around them thickened, charged with tension, the kind of energy that hummed in Gage's chest. He could feel her power, undeniable, radiating toward him like an electric current. She wasn't here to learn. She was here to test him. To challenge him in ways he had never been tested before. "You're not going easy on me, are you?" Gage's voice was low, steady, though beneath the calm exterior, there was a flicker of anticipation. Viara's lips curved into the smallest of smiles, the kind that was almost a threat in itself. "I don't go easy on anyone," she said, her voice smooth, dangerous. "If you want to train me, you'll have to prove you're worthy of the task." With that, the room erupted into motion. Their bodies collided with a sharp crack, the air filled with the sound of their struggle, the scrape of limbs meeting metal, their breaths coming fast and heavy. Gage's movements were controlled, precise, each strike calculated to disable, to bring her down without harm. But Viara was chaos in motion. She danced around him, fluid, unpredictable, her fists and legs striking with the precision of a trained predator. She was a whirlwind of focused rage, every movement deliberate, lethal. She wasn't just sparring with him, she was testing his every limit, pushing him to the edge with each clash. Gage moved fast, but she was faster, her counters instinctive, born of deep experience, battles fought on countless worlds. Yet, beneath the fury, there was a rhythm to her fighting. A deadly, sensual grace, like the calm before a storm. They moved together in a deadly ballet, a vicious dance of wills, their bodies intertwining with each strike, each block, each parry. Gage could feel it, the heat between them, the crackling intensity, like two magnets drawn together by an invisible force. As their bodies collided again and again, the distance between them shrank until they were nearly pressed together, every breath mingling in the space between them. For a brief, fleeting moment, time seemed to stand still. Gage, eyes narrowed in concentration, saw the smallest of openings. Just a fraction of a second. In that instant, he seized the opportunity. With a swift, calculated move, he maneuvered Viara into a position she couldn't escape. One quick shift, and he had her pinned against the cold, unforgiving wall of the training room. His arm was locked across her neck, his chest pressed into her back. Viara's breath came in sharp bursts, her body tense beneath him. For a moment, she struggled, trying to break free, but then she stopped. Her muscles remained tense, but there was a quiet acknowledgement in her movements, a reluctant surrender. The room was silent, save for their ragged breathing. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Something flickered between them, something unspoken, something alive. A current. A spark. Viara's eyes, once as cold as ice, softened ever so slightly. Then, a smirk tugged at the corner of her lips, the first sign of vulnerability. Her voice, low and almost playful, broke the tension. "Not bad, for a human," she said, her tone filled with reluctant admiration. For the first time, Gage saw something beyond her defiance. It was curiosity. Respect. A flicker of recognition. It was the beginning of something neither of them had expected. The cold, metallic corridors of the station echoed with the rhythmic sound of boots against the floor. Gage walked alone, his thoughts scattered, still lingering on the events of the earlier training session. But the eerie silence was abruptly shattered by hurried footsteps, a scuffle, a shout. Something was wrong. Before he could react, a sharp cry rang out, followed by a dull thud. His instincts kicked in. He broke into a run, closing the distance between him and the disturbance. The air grew thick, charged with an undeniable sense of impending danger. Then, he saw her. Viara. She was backed into a corner, her stance defensive, her breathing shallow, but it was the bloodstains on her uniform that told the true story. Her once vibrant red skin was now marred by the evidence of a brutal fight. Standing before her, a malicious grin twisting his blue features, was Trell Voss. The tip of his blade glinted dangerously in his hand. "You think you can walk away from me, Pyan?" Trell sneered, his voice a low growl that echoed down the empty corridor. Viara's eyes burned with hatred. "I've already walked away from worse than you, Voss," she spat, her voice edged with pain, the sound betraying her attempts to conceal it. Gage didn't hesitate. Moving swiftly like a shadow, he closed the distance in an instant. His hand shot out, knocking Trell's arm aside, sending the blade clattering to the floor. The blue-skinned alien whirled around, fury blazing in his eyes. But Gage was already on him fast, efficient. Within seconds, Trell was on the ground, nursing a wound to his side, cursing as he scrambled to retreat. Gage's focus immediately shifted back to Viara. She was leaning heavily against the wall, her body unsteady. Her breath came in ragged gasps, blood staining the edges of her clothes. But even in her weakened state, she stood tall, a warrior's pride still holding her upright. "I don't need your help, human," she growled, her voice thick with defiance. Yet, there was a subtle crack in her words, a softening that she quickly tried to hide. She took a step back, unsteady, as if the ground beneath her had suddenly lost its strength. "You're injured," Gage said, his voice soft but firm. His eyes scanned her wounds quickly. "I'm not asking, Viara. You're coming with me." She shook her head, lips pressed tightly together. "I don't need a human playing nursemaid." Gage didn't respond. Instead, he moved in close, his arms sliding beneath her shoulders and at her waist. Without waiting for her consent, he lifted her effortlessly, his grip strong but gentle, the heat of her body against his reminding him that beneath her warrior's exterior, she was still alive, still human. And wounded. Viara stiffened at first, her muscles tense with resistance, but she didn't fight him. She fell into his hold, the sharpness of her pride dulled by the exhaustion, by the vulnerability she couldn't quite hide. The silence between them thickened as he carried her through the quiet, dimly lit hallways of the station. It wasn't the sharp tension of their previous encounter. It wasn't the anger, or the defiance. This was something different. Something unspoken, but undeniably real. Gage's mind raced, trying to focus on the task at hand, but his gaze kept flicking to Viara. There was something softening in her expression, a surrender, reluctant but unmistakable. Beneath the layers of pride, there was something raw, something human. He carried her to his quarters, a decision that surprised him. He had no reason to take her there, no need to attract unnecessary attention. The medbay could wait. He could tend to her injuries himself. But as he laid her gently on the couch, there was a tenderness to the gesture that lingered in the air, a quiet intimacy he hadn't expected. The room was dim, the only light coming from the soft glow of the station's exterior lights filtering through the window. Gage moved around the room, gathering supplies, his movements steady and focused. But his thoughts kept returning to her, Viara Tavari, proud, unyielding, and now, for the first time, vulnerable. Her voice cut through the silence, softer than he had heard all day. "Why are you, kind?" she asked, the question barely a whisper. Her gaze was distant, as though she were searching for something she didn't understand. Gage paused, meeting her eyes. For the first time since they'd crossed paths, he really saw her. His expression softened, his eyes filled with understanding. "Because someone has to be," he said, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable truth. "And you're more than just a warrior, Viara." The silence that followed was thick, heavy with meaning. Neither of them moved. The weight of his words settled between them, an unexpected clarity, a quiet moment of intimacy that neither of them had anticipated. Viara didn't speak immediately. Instead, her eyelids fluttered closed, her breath evening out as the pain and exhaustion finally pulled her into a restless sleep. And in that quiet room, for just a moment, both of them understood something new, something that had yet to fully unfold. The soft hum of the station's life support systems blended with the steady rhythm of Gage's movements as he carefully tended to the gash on Viara's side. The dim light in his quarters flickered faintly, the only source of illumination coming from the distant stars shining through the window. Gage worked with practiced hands, cleaning the wound and applying the salve, the methodical care of someone accustomed to this task. But this was different. Viara wasn't just another soldier in need of medical attention. She was something more. Something he couldn't quite explain. Her breath was shallow, her body tense under his touch, but she didn't flinch. Her fiery red eyes, full of strength, stayed fixed on a point beyond him, as if she were trying to distance herself from him, from the situation. The silence between them felt thick, but not uncomfortable. It was a silence full of unspoken understanding. A space where they could breathe without the weight of words pressing down on them. Gage knew better than to rush her. Some walls took time to break down. Once he finished dressing her wound, the bandage snug but not too tight, he wiped his hands on a cloth, the moment hanging heavy in the air. There was something in the silence now. Something fragile, as if they were both teetering on the edge of something deeper. Viara's gaze flickered back to him. Her expression was still hard, the walls she had built around herself standing tall, but there was something there now, a crack. A flicker of vulnerability she couldn't hide. "I've never needed anyone before," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. It sounded hoarse, as though the words had been buried for a long time. "Not like this." Gage didn't speak immediately. His eyes softened, but he held her gaze without judgment. He wasn't in a hurry to fix her, to say the right thing. He simply allowed her the space to speak, knowing that some things couldn't be forced out. Viara looked away then, her eyes drifting to the far corner of the room, her shoulders stiff as she braced herself for what was clearly a struggle. Her voice cracked as she spoke again, words full of pain she had tried for so long to bury. "They exiled me," she continued, the words heavy with a sorrow she had never let herself acknowledge. "My people, they cast me out. Said I was weak. That I had no place among them anymore. That I was a failure. A disgrace." Her confession hung in the air, thick with grief, and for a moment, Gage simply stood still, letting her speak. He could hear the pain beneath her words, the rawness she had never allowed anyone to see. It was a truth she had carried alone for far too long. For a moment, it seemed like she might retreat, lock herself back behind the walls she had spent years building. But then, she continued, and this time, her voice faltered more, the armor she wore cracking even further. "On my world, compassion is weakness," she whispered, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I tried to help, to save them. I thought if I showed them kindness, if I showed them mercy, that we could come together, heal. But they didn't want it. They called me weak. And now, I'm nothing." The bitterness in her voice was palpable. Each word was like a wound, fresh and open, one she had kept hidden for so long. Her jaw clenched as she tried to regain control, the mask she had worn for years slipping as she spoke the truth for the first time. Gage didn't interrupt. He didn't try to offer her empty words of comfort. He simply listened, his eyes steady and filled with an understanding that was more powerful than any reassurance he could give. Viara had expected anger. She had expected pity, maybe even judgment. But there was none of that in Gage's eyes. Instead, there was just quiet, unwavering support. He didn't look at her as a failure or a broken warrior. He looked at her like she was worth something, like she had value beyond the walls she had built. As she finished, the silence between them deepened, but it was no longer a silence of walls closing in. It was the silence of those same walls starting to crumble, piece by piece. Gage's voice was gentle, firm, but without hesitation. "I don't think compassion is weakness," he said, his words simple but carrying the weight of everything he had learned. Maybe it's the only thing that makes us strong." Viara's eyes flickered to his, emotions swirling within them. She didn't know how to respond. She didn't know how to process the truth he had just spoken. She had spent years convincing herself that her way of life was the only way, that her strength lay in standing alone. But here, with Gage, it was different. She had always believed that kindness was something to be feared, something that could break her. But now, in this moment, she saw something she hadn't allowed herself to see before, a strength and vulnerability, in allowing someone else in. Her lips trembled slightly, but she quickly pressed them into a thin line, trying to hold back the storm of emotions threatening to rise. Her shoulders slumped, the weight of everything she had carried alone for so long finally beginning to break her down. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Not as a warrior. Not as a failure. But as someone worthy of kindness, even in the most broken of states. "Why are you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Why are you so kind?" Gage didn't offer a quick answer. Instead, he simply met her gaze, his expression open and steady. There were no shields, no walls between them now. "Because I don't believe anyone is beyond redemption," he said quietly, his voice warm and sincere. "And I don't believe anyone should have to suffer alone." The room fell silent again, but this time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence where understanding was shared, where unspoken bonds began to form. Viara didn't speak again, but she didn't need to. The connection between them was enough. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to rest, to let go of the weight of her pride and let someone else see her for who she truly was. And Gage, for his part, didn't look away. He simply held her gaze, offering her the quiet reassurance that, for once, she wasn't as alone as she had always believed. The room felt different now. The air between them was thick with something unspoken, a current neither of them had expected. The space that had once been defined by combat, urgency, and survival was now transformed into something quieter, more intimate, more fragile. Viara lay back against the couch, her body still taut with the weight of what she had just shared. Gage stood nearby, his presence unwavering, a solid force in the quiet room. Yet, he didn't crowd her. He had given her the space to breathe, to process, to heal. His gaze never wavered, though, and she could feel it, his attention, focused entirely on her. Even with her eyes closed, she was aware of him, his presence as constant as the hum of the station's systems. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It felt like a shared understanding, a moment of peace they had never known before. But in that stillness, something stirred. It was subtle at first, a quiet crackle, like the faintest hum of static before a storm. Neither of them could ignore it. Neither of them wanted to. Viara opened her eyes slowly, and as her gaze met Gage's, the world outside seemed to fade away. The room, the station, the chaos of their lives, it all disappeared, leaving only them. Her heart, still haunted by the weight of the past, thudded erratically in her chest, out of sync, a rhythm she couldn't control. Gage took a deliberate step closer, his expression soft but unreadable, his eyes reflecting something she couldn't quite name. Was it sympathy? Or was it something deeper? She felt the pull, but her body screamed at her to pull back, to guard herself, to keep the walls intact. Yet, she couldn't move. It was like something inside her was being drawn to him, powerless to stop it. His hand reached toward her, slow and careful, as if seeking permission though she hadn't spoken a word. The space between them seemed to vanish, the distance both physical and emotional narrowing with each heartbeat. He leaned in, his breath warm against her skin, and she closed her eyes, the world shrinking to only the two of them. Their lips met, tentative at first, like an unspoken question, a search for understanding. Gage's lips were soft against hers, cautious, waiting for some sign from her. Viara's breath hitched at the contact, and for a moment, everything stilled. There were no words, no barriers, only the feeling of him against her, solid and real. As the kiss deepened, a wave of electricity surged through them, igniting something neither of them had expected. The warmth of his touch, the gentleness of his kiss, sent a jolt through Viara, stirring emotions she had long buried. It was a shock to her system of feelings she had never allowed herself to experience, one that both terrified and captivated her. It felt like a spark had been lit inside her, a fire that spread quickly, but she wasn't ready for the heat. And just as quickly as the fire had ignited, it began to overwhelm her. Viara pulled away, her breath shaky, her hands trembling as she pushed gently against his chest, her heart racing with a rush of emotions she wasn't prepared for. She hadn't expected this. Hadn't expected to feel this vulnerable, this alive, in a way she hadn't allowed herself to for so long. She sat up, her body rigid as her gaze shifted away from him. The rawness of her expression was something she couldn't hide, something that made her feel exposed in a way she wasn't used to. Her chest heaved as she fought to regain her composure, to push the flood of emotions that had erupted within her back into the depths where they had lived for years. I need time, she whispered, her voice soft and trembling with the weight of what had just transpired. The words were heavy, but they weren't a rejection. They were simply the truth, a truth she wasn't ready to confront yet. Gage stood still for a moment, his chest tight with understanding. He had felt it too, the intensity, the undeniable pull, the connection that had surged between them in that kiss. But he saw the hesitation in her eyes. He saw the confusion, the fear, the vulnerability she wasn't ready to embrace. He nodded slowly, his voice calm and steady. I understand, he said simply, the sincerity in his words clear. I'll give you the time you need, Viara. I won't push. His gaze lingered on her for just a moment longer, filled with respect, understanding, and perhaps something more. But he didn't close the distance between them. He stepped back, giving her the space she had asked for, the space she needed. Viara remained where she was, her hands resting in her lap as her heart continued to race. She wasn't sure what had just happened between them, but one thing was certain: the walls she had spent so many years building were starting to crumble. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she wanted to rebuild them. As Gage turned to leave, she couldn't help but glance at him one last time. Her heart ached with an unfamiliar longing, one she didn't know how to handle. But in that fleeting moment, she realized something. Whatever was happening between them, whatever this was, it was something she couldn't deny forever. She wasn't ready yet. But for the first time, she wasn't running from it either. The days that followed the kiss were clouded in uncertainty, every moment heavy with the tension that lingered between Gage and Viara. They didn't speak of it again, but the unspoken connection between them was undeniable. Gage focused on his duties, though his thoughts often drifted back to that fragile, fleeting moment. The kiss had sparked something neither of them had expected, something uncharted, something dangerous. But the silence between them was not the only thing growing. Unseen threats began to creep in. It started subtly: whispers in the corridors, furtive glances exchanged in hallways, a tension that hung in the air like static. At first, it didn't make sense. Then came the summons, an official request for Gage to appear. The message was cold and straightforward: Gage Callahan, you are hereby summoned for an inquiry regarding accusations of assault and misconduct. You are to report to the station's command center immediately. Gage's stomach churned as he read the words. Assault? Misconduct? His mind raced, confusion gripping him. But even as he tried to process, he knew exactly where it had come from. Trell. Trell's anger had been palpable when Gage intervened in the altercation with Viara. He hadn't hidden his disdain for Gage's interference, but Gage had never expected it to escalate to this. A fight, perhaps. A few harsh words. But this was something entirely different. The thought of Viara twisted in his gut. She had disappeared without a word. Her absence, unsettling, only added to the mounting confusion. She hadn't responded to any of his messages, and despite his attempts to find her, she was nowhere to be seen. His instincts told him she had to be involved somehow. She was the only one who could clear his name. When Gage arrived at the command center, the air felt thick with hostility. The cold, impersonal walls of the room reflected the severity of the situation, and the officers waiting for him were already seated, their expressions unreadable. It felt like they were waiting for him to falter, to show some sign of weakness they could exploit. Before Gage could speak, Captain Morrow stood, his voice cold and clinical. Commander Callahan, he said, the words like a blow. You are accused of assaulting Lieutenant Trell Voss, as well as causing significant disruption to station security and operations. These are serious charges, and they will be thoroughly investigated. You are hereby restricted from further duties until the inquiry is concluded. The weight of those words slammed into Gage. Assault? He had barely touched Trell. The incident had been a fleeting clash, an exchange of words, nothing more. But Trell had spun it into something far more dangerous, weaving a narrative that painted Gage as the aggressor. You have anything to say in your defense? Morrow asked, his gaze expectant. I didn't do what he's accusing me of, Gage responded, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside. This is a setup. Morrow's response was swift and dismissive. You'll have the opportunity to defend yourself at the formal hearing. Until then, you're suspended from duty. The meeting ended as abruptly as it had started, leaving Gage with nothing but a suffocating silence. His uniform felt like a weight now, the badge he wore no longer one of honor but a mark of shame. None of it made sense, the accusations, the timing. It all seemed too orchestrated. As Gage walked back to his quarters, his mind churned. Trell was clever, methodical. He had known how to plant doubt, how to twist the truth. But Gage also knew this had nothing to do with the fight. Trell's revenge was deeper, more insidious than that. And then, it hit him. Viara. She had to be the key. She was the only one who had witnessed the truth of what had happened. But where had she gone? His worry gnawed at him. He had to find her, had to speak with her, to get the truth. Time was running out. Viara was sharp. She wouldn't have disappeared without a plan. She was working on something, he was sure of it. She wouldn't let him take the fall. But could he trust that she would reach out in time? Hours passed. The weight of the situation began to suffocate him, the clock ticking as the walls seemed to close in. And just as hope began to slip away, a small message appeared on his COMM unit. His heart skipped as he read it. The words were brief, direct. Gage, stay calm. I'm working on clearing your name. I'll be in touch soon. Don't trust anyone. Relief surged through him, though it was tempered by the heavy realization of just how deep this ran. Viara's words were a lifeline, but they reminded him of the danger they were in. Trell was not a fool. He would stop at nothing to destroy both of them. Gage clenched his jaw, his resolve hardening. He wouldn't let this happen. He couldn't. He wouldn't let Trell win. As he stood in his quarters, staring out into the vast expanse of the station, the weight of the situation pressed on him. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The station's corridors had never felt so cold. Each echo of Gage's footsteps reverberated through the empty space, amplifying the isolation he felt. His suspension weighed heavily on him, each moment stretching longer, pulling him deeper into uncertainty. But despite it all, a flicker of hope remained buried in his gut. He knew Viara was out there working to expose the truth, to clear his name from the lies Trell had woven. But where was she? It had been hours since her last message, brief and direct. The silence had stretched on, and as time ticked by, Gage's hope began to fade. Was she safe? Or was she risking everything to prove his innocence? Just as doubt started to settle in, the door to his quarters slid open with a soft hiss. Standing in a dim doorway was Viara. Gage's heart skipped a beat. The sight of her fiery red skin glowing faintly in the low light felt like a breath of air after being submerged underwater. She stood tense, her eyes quickly scanning the corridor before meeting his gaze. Viara, Gage whispered, the name barely escaping his lips as if saying it would shatter the fragile moment. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she stepped inside, moving with purpose, her eyes flicking to the table where Gage had been hunched over, poring through data and evidence, trying to make sense of the chaos. But he couldn't focus, not until she spoke. I found something, she said, her voice low and filled with determination. Proof. Proof that Trell lied. Gage's heart raced as she pulled a small data chip from her jacket and set it down between them. Their fingers brushed as he reached for it, a fleeting contact that sent a shock through him, but there was no time to dwell on it now. He slid the chip into his console, his eyes fixed on the screen as it flickered to life. The files appeared, confidential recordings, intercepted messages, and surveillance data. All of it pointed to the same conclusion: Trell had staged the entire incident, manipulating evidence, and altering records to frame Gage for something he didn't do. "This is it," Gage murmured, disbelief and anger rising in his chest. "This proves it. Trell's the one who's been lying." "I know," Viara interrupted, her voice quieter now, tinged with something deeper. She stepped closer to him, her gaze unwavering. "I know. But I won't let him get away with it." Her words cut through him, solidifying the resolve in his chest. They had the evidence they needed, but the weight of what came next pressed down on them both. Exposing Trell would not come without consequences. Trell would retaliate, and Gage knew the station's leadership wouldn't be far behind. But there was no turning back now. The truth had to come to light. In the quiet of that moment, the air between them shifted. Gage turned to face her, really seeing her for the first time in days. No walls, no barriers between them. Just two people who had been through hell and were now standing together, facing whatever came next. Viara's voice broke the silence, soft yet firm, carrying an unexpected weight. "You made me believe in something again. Something I thought I'd lost forever." She swallowed hard, her jaw tightening. "I won't let them destroy you." Her words were more than a promise, they were a declaration. And in that instant, it felt like the rest of the world outside the room had faded away. The years of isolation, of carrying her pain alone, melted in that moment. She was here fighting for him, and for the first time in a long time, Viara let herself believe in something more than just survival. Gage stepped forward, his chest tight with emotion. "Viara, I..." But before he could finish, she shook her head, her expression softening but still guarded. "Don't say it," she whispered, her voice trembling just slightly. "Not yet. Not until we finish this. We're not done." He stopped, the weight of her words settling in him like a quiet understanding. There was no room for distractions now, no time for anything but finishing what they had started. He respected her decision. She was right. They couldn't afford to let anything interfere with the mission ahead. But deep inside, Gage knew the connection between them had changed. It wasn't just a fragile thread anymore. It was something stronger, something undeniable. He would follow her into this fight, whatever the cost. He nodded, his voice low but certain. "Then let's finish it. Together." Viara's lips curled slightly, the faintest hint of a smile breaking through the walls she had so carefully built around herself. "Together," she echoed softly, the promise hanging in the air between them. And in that moment, something shifted. The uncertainty, the fear, the pain, it was all there, but it no longer had the power to break them. Viara and Gage weren't just fighting for justice anymore. They were fighting for each other, for the bond they had forged in the crucible of conflict. The battle ahead would be hard, but with the truth on their side, and this newfound connection between them, they would stand together ready to face whatever Trell, and the station itself, threw their way. The bustling corridors of Aridin Station had never felt so alive. The air was thick with the sounds of music, laughter, and the clinking of glasses, as people from all corners of the galaxy gathered for the festival. It was a rare moment of joy and unity in an otherwise tense environment, a fleeting moment of peace. But beneath the lively festivities, there was a quiet undercurrent, something darker, something that neither Gage nor Viara could ignore. Gage stood at the edge of the crowd, his gaze sweeping over the sea of faces. Beside him, Viara moved with an air of quiet confidence, impossible to miss in the midst of the celebration. Though she was still recovering from her recent injury, there was no trace of weakness in her. Not here, not now. Her eyes were sharp, focused, calculating, locked on Trell Voss, who was mingling with station officials and military personnel at the center of the hall. His smug smile betrayed none of the lies he'd woven into the fabric of their lives. The trap was set. It had been Viara's idea. She knew Trell couldn't resist an opportunity to assert his dominance, to make a spectacle of his power. He was driven by pride and ego, and she and Gage had used that against him. The public nature of the festival was their greatest advantage. Trell believed himself untouchable in the midst of the celebration, but what he didn't know was that they were watching him every word, every move, tracked, recorded. "Are you ready?" Gage's voice was low, barely a whisper, his eyes still scanning the crowd. Viara nodded, her expression calm but resolute. There was a fire in her eyes, a determination forged from everything she had endured. "I'm ready," she replied. "Let's end this." The music swelled in the background, and for a moment, it felt as if time had paused. Viara's hand rested on the small of her back, her fingers grazing the concealed weapon at her side. Gage's hand was near his own, hovering over his pulse gun, ready to act if necessary. But this wasn't about violence. This was about exposing the truth, about bringing Trell's lies to light. And then, it happened. Trell, scanning the crowd, caught sight of Viara. His eyes narrowed, and for a split second, Gage saw the flicker of recognition. The realization that the trap was closing in around him. He began to move toward Viara, his body language a mix of anger and contempt. Before Gage could react, Trell lunged. In an instant, he closed the distance between them, his hand reaching out to grab Viara's arm with brutal force. The crowd didn't see it coming, the sudden violence, the swift change in the air. Gasps rippled through the room as Trell yanked her forward, his eyes flashing with fury. "You think you can ruin me?" Trell spat, his grip tightening around Viara's arm. "I'll make you regret ever crossing me." Viara stumbled but regained her balance, her eyes meeting his with cold fury. She didn't flinch. She didn't cry out. She didn't need to. With a swift twist of her body, Viara broke free of his grip. The crowd parted, their attention rapt as she stood tall in the face of her adversary. Her voice rang out, cutting through the tension like a blade. "Enough, Trell," she said, her tone sharp, commanding. "You want to know the truth? You want to know why I'm standing here?" The room went quiet, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. "You lied," Viara continued, her voice unwavering, filled with the power of undeniable conviction. "You manipulated the truth. You framed Gage to cover up your own corruption. The records, the messages, the evidence, it all points to you. You thought you could hide behind your rank and power, but I won't let you get away with it." Trell's expression twisted with fury, but the confidence was gone. He tried to step forward, but the security forces, who had been quietly monitoring him, moved in swiftly, surrounding him. Gage stepped forward, his posture resolute, his voice calm yet commanding. "Trell Voss," he said, his tone cutting through the tension, "you're under arrest for conspiracy, falsifying evidence, and assault. You won't be able to hide anymore." The air crackled with electricity as the truth was laid bare, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone in the room. Trell's smugness crumbled as the reality of his situation dawned on him. His web of lies had unraveled. The evidence was irrefutable. But Trell wasn't done. He tried to resist, struggled against the security officers, but it was too late. They subdued him quickly, with practiced precision. He had no escape, no more lies to hide behind. As Trell was escorted away, the crowd erupted into whispers, a mix of disbelief and awe. Viara stood tall, her chest heaving slightly from the exertion, but her expression remained unbroken. She had done it. She had exposed Trell's lies for the galaxy to see, for everyone who had ever doubted her. Gage stood beside her, his eyes meeting hers in silent understanding. He had watched her fight for so long, but now, he saw her in a new light, not just a warrior, but someone who had fought for truth, for justice. "You did it," Gage whispered, his voice thick with admiration. Viara didn't respond immediately. She kept her gaze locked on the retreating figure of Trell, her focus unshaken. After a moment, she turned to Gage, and for the first time, a faint, triumphant smile tugged at her lips, a smile that spoke volumes about everything she had overcome, everything she had fought for. "I did," she said softly, her voice full of quiet pride. And in that moment, as the sounds of the festival returned and the chaos slowly faded into a new calm, Gage knew they had won. Not just against Trell, but against everything that had tried to break them. They had torn down the walls, the lies, the fear, the uncertainty, and now, what stood between them was something far stronger, the truth, and the bond they had forged together. The halls of Aridin Station had never felt so still. The usual hum of activity, the hurried footsteps of staff, and the clatter of machinery had quieted, leaving only the deep, almost tangible silence in the wake of the storm. Everything that had led up to this moment, the chaos, the lies, the confrontation with Trell, had culminated in a singular point, and now, the world around Viara felt suspended, like a deep breath before the exhale. She stood in the command center, her back straight and her eyes focused, but there was an undeniable lightness to her posture. The weight of years of exile had been lifted, and the truth had finally come out. Trell's lies had been exposed for all to see, and his arrest had been swift. His once proud status had crumbled, taking with it the darkness he had tried to cast over her. But it wasn't just a political victory that had changed her. The truth had freed her, yes. But more than that, it had freed something else within her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel for years. The door to the command center slid open, and Viara felt a quiet sense of anticipation build within her as she moved toward the small garden outside. There, standing beneath the artificial sunlight that bathed the room, was Gage. His posture was relaxed, but his gaze was intense, focused on her as she approached. For a moment, the rest of the station faded into the background. In that quiet space, there was only one thing that mattered. Gage. He turned to her as she neared, a small, genuine smile spreading across his face. It wasn't the smile of a comrade, or one of duty. No, this was something else entirely, a smile that spoke of trust, respect, and something deeper, something unspoken. "You did it," Gage said softly, his voice warm with pride. "You really did it." Viara's lips curved into a rare smile, one filled with quiet joy, relief, and the kind of pride that was earned, not given. It took Gage a moment to realize that this was the first time he had seen her smile like this. Not the hardened smirk from their earlier encounters or the guarded expression that had masked her true feelings. No, this was something different. It was real. "I did," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's over." Gage stepped forward, moving closer than he ever had before. His eyes softened as they met hers, a quiet, unspoken understanding passing between them. This wasn't just about the victory they had won against Trell. This was about something deeper, something they had both discovered in each other along the way. "You've been through so much, Viara," Gage said, his voice thick with emotion. "And you still came out stronger. I'm proud of you." Viara didn't speak at first. She simply looked at him, her eyes shining with something that wasn't just gratitude. It was something more, a rawness that had been buried beneath years of pain and self-reliance. The words stuck in her throat, but she finally managed to speak, her voice steady yet filled with a depth she had never allowed herself to express before. "You've changed me, Gage," she said softly, her smile widening, the warmth in her voice reflecting the understanding she had come to. "Not broken. Not tamed. Just whole." Her words hit him like a wave, sweeping away any lingering doubt, any walls that had once separated them. This wasn't just about fighting battles or defeating enemies. This was about the connection between them, something they had both been hesitant to acknowledge but could no longer deny. Gage's hand moved toward her, hesitating for a moment before gently resting on her arm, grounding both of them in the moment. He didn't need to speak. The understanding between them was more than enough. They had both found something in each other that had been missing for so long. A truth. A connection. Something neither of them had expected but both desperately needed. Viara took a steadying breath, her hand gently covering his as they stood there together. The silence between them felt comfortable now, filled with the promise of a future that wasn't weighed down by their pasts or the battles they had fought alone. The past, the isolation, the pain no longer defined them. What defined them now was the bond they had forged in the heat of their struggles. "You're free," Gage said quietly, his voice full of emotion. "And so am I. But we're not alone anymore." Viara didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned her head gently against his, a soft gesture of trust, of belonging. The hard edges of her past had softened in this moment. The walls she had built for years were no longer keeping her safe. They had crumbled, and in their place was something she had never allowed herself to feel: peace. "I don't have to fight alone anymore," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "No," Gage replied, his voice equally soft. "We fight together. Always." And in that moment, as the soft light bathed them both, Viara's smile grew wider, a true smile, one that spoke of acceptance, of hope, and of the kind of victory that came not from external battles, but from the wars they had fought within themselves. Together, they had found something worth fighting for. And for the first time, neither of them was alone. The transport ship hummed softly beneath their feet as it glided effortlessly through the vast emptiness of space, heading toward Earth. The bustling chaos of Aridin Station had faded into the distance, leaving only memories of the battles they had fought and the victories they had claimed. For Gage and Viara, the future was no longer uncertain steps, it was a wide-open horizon, filled with possibilities neither of them had dared to imagine just months ago. The ship's interior was cozy, its sleek metallic surfaces complemented by soft, ambient lighting. It was a stark contrast to the harsh, unforgiving realities of the station they had just left behind. The windows ahead offered a view of the stars, pinpricks of light scattered across the endless expanse, each one a promise of new worlds waiting to be explored. Gage sat across from Viara, his posture relaxed, but there was a weight to his gaze, something that had been growing between them, in the quiet moments following the storm. The chaos of their shared past had given way to something new, something unspoken yet undeniable. They had both changed, both grown, and in the stillness of this journey, they found themselves at peace for the first time in what felt like forever. Viara stared out the window, her eyes soft as she took in the beauty of space. She wasn't the same woman who had walked into Aridin Station all those months ago, battle-hardened, distant, and defensive. The woman beside him now was stronger, yes, but there was an openness to her, a vulnerability that hadn't been there before. She had allowed herself to be seen, truly seen, in a way she never had. And Gage couldn't help but admire her for it. He watched her for a moment before breaking the silence, his voice light and playful. "You know," he said, a teasing smile forming on his lips, "fierce warriors make the best kittens." Viara's gaze flicked to him, a spark of amusement in her eyes. She raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a sly grin. "Oh? And why's that, human?" Gage leaned back in his seat, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Well," he said, leaning a little closer, "because even the fiercest warriors have a softer side. A purr that's just waiting to come out." Viara's grin widened, and her gaze shifted, a challenge in her eyes. She leaned forward, closing the distance between them. "Purr at your own risk, human," she said, her voice low and teasing, but with an unmistakable warmth underneath. Gage chuckled, unable to resist. His hand reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear before lingering on her cheek. His thumb traced the curve of her jaw, the simple touch sending a rush of warmth through him. "I think I can handle the risk," he murmured, his voice soft but filled with intent. Before she could respond, Gage leaned in, his lips brushing against hers. The kiss was slow at first, tentative, as if savoring the moment, a quiet exploration of something they had both felt for some time. The weight of everything that had come before them, the battles, the heartache, the unspoken promises, seemed to dissolve as they shared the kiss, a soft, tender affirmation of what they had discovered in each other. It wasn't just passion or desire. No, this was trust. This was the understanding that, no matter where they went, they would face it together. As they pulled apart, their foreheads rested against each other, the quiet hum of the ship the only sound between them. Viara's breath was warm against his skin, her eyes soft and full of something new, something neither of them could yet define, but both knew would carry them forward. "Together," she whispered, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. Always, Gage replied, his voice steady, unwavering. The promise was simple, but it was everything. With that, the ship's engines roared to life, a deep, resonant hum filling the cabin as the countdown to hyperspace began. Outside, the stars blurred into streaks of light as the vastness of the universe stretched out before them, waiting. Endless possibilities. And as the ship leapt into hyperspace, Gage and Viara sat there, hand in hand, ready for whatever came next. No longer bound by the past, no longer haunted by the shadows of their former lives, they looked forward to a future they would face together. A new chapter. A new journey. The possibilities were endless. The darkness looms over the halls of Aridin Station. Faint lights reflect off cold metal walls. In that eerie silence, a storm quietly brews, one that threatens to sweep everything away. Gage Callahan, commander of a covert operation, steps out from the shadows. His eyes are sharp as blades, his grip tight around his weapon. He's here not because he wants to be, but because he can't walk away. Security has been compromised. Dark schemes are slowly being uncovered. And Gage knows the stakes in this fight. No one stands alone. A voice slices through the silence, cold and steady. If you take one more step, Gage, you'll lose everything. Viara Tavari. The proud Pyan warrior, her voice echoing from the shadows. She stands tall, unmoved by the enemies around her. Everyone thought she was dead, but Viara didn't die. She survived, driven by the pursuit of justice. The truth is her weapon now, and she won't stop until it's found. Gage doesn't flinch. He turns toward her, their eyes meeting in a moment of silent understanding, both of them resolute. We don't have time, Viara. We need to act now. Then, a loud noise echoes from the far end of the hallway. A figure emerges from the shadows. Trell Voss. The man who sold his soul to darkness, the one who manipulated it all. Now, he's here to finish what he started. You think you can stop me? Trell sneers, his laugh low and taunting, sending a chill through the air. Both you and her will pay the price for this. Gage and Viara stand in silent solidarity, no words exchanged, just a quiet understanding between them. They know there's no turning back now. If they don't stop him, everything they've fought for will be lost. The entire station has become a deadly game. The reason Trell wants it all destroyed will be revealed right now. The truth is about to come to light. And when it does, everything will change. What becomes of those who betray? Can they escape their fate? Or will they pay the cost of their actions? Stay tuned for the next twist in this story, where there's no forgiveness, no way back, only survival and the final choice. Can Gage and Viara face the storm together, or will they be swept away in an unforgiving struggle? And so, the storm passed, but the echoes of the battle still resonated in the corners of Aridin Station. Gage and Viara, two souls bound by fate and unwavering determination, had confronted betrayal, lies, and their darkest fears. Trell's empire of deceit had crumbled, leaving behind only the remnants of his falsehoods. In the aftermath, Viara was no longer the exiled warrior she once was. She had reclaimed her truth, and with it, her place in the universe. But the journey didn't end there. No, the road ahead stretched out before them, winding through uncertainty and danger. The shadows of the past were far from gone, and new enemies would rise from the ashes, eager to seize power and silence the truth. Their fight for justice was far from over. As the stars outside their ship blurred into streaks of light, Gage and Viara realized that they weren't merely fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for each other, for a future they hadn't dared to imagine before. For something greater than themselves. The truth had been revealed. Trell had been exposed. But deep down, they both knew this, their story was only beginning. What lay ahead? What new worlds would they explore? Who else would challenge their bond and their purpose? The adventure continues, and the stakes are higher than ever. Don't miss out. The next chapter of this incredible journey is just around the corner. The battle for the future is far from over. Subscribe now, because the unexpected awaits. Stay tuned, and prepare for what comes next.